As passengers boarded the bustling flight from New York to Los Angeles, none could imagine the lesson in courage and bias they were about to witness. In the corner of first class sat Elijah Carter, a black man enjoying his rare break from the cockpit, unaware that his simple presence would spark an unforgettable chain of events. But when a flight attendant's quiet prejudice surfaced, questioning his right to sit there, Elijah had a choice to make. Let the moment pass, or turn it into a powerful stand for dignity and change. What unfolded next would leave the entire plane stunned, proving that leadership isn't just about position. It's about how you rise above adversity. Stay with us to see how Captain Carter transformed an act of discrimination into an inspiring journey for everyone on board. The airport was alive with the hum of rolling suitcases, snippets of conversations, and the occasional crackle of announcements echoing through the terminal. Outside, the sticky New York summer lingered, casting a humid sheen on passengers as they hurried toward their gates. Among them was Captain Elijah Carter, blending seamlessly into the throng of travelers. Today, Elijah wasn't wearing his usual sharp pilot's uniform. Instead, he was dressed in a neatly pressed button-down shirt and casual jeans, a small carry-on in tow. For once, he wasn't heading to the cockpit. Instead, he was boarding as a passenger. Settling into a first-class seat he rarely had the chance to enjoy. Elijah had always loved the feeling of stepping onto a plane, whether he was flying it or not. There was something magical about the quiet promise of soaring above the clouds. He found his seat, stowed his bag, and took out a dog-eared book on the history of aviation. Leaning back, he allowed himself a rare moment of relaxation. This trip was supposed to be different. No responsibilities, no weight of command, just a chance to sit back and let someone else take the reins. As boarding continued, a steady stream of passengers moved past, some casting quick glances his way. Elijah noticed, but didn't think much of it. Even in 2024, a black man in first class was enough to turn a few heads. He had learned to let these moments roll off his back, though they were a constant reminder of how far society still had to go. For now, he was content to enjoy the plush comfort of the leather seat and immerse himself in the story of the pioneers who had shaped the skies. The atmosphere shifted as a petite, impeccably groomed woman in her mid-40s approached. Her polished demeanor and brisk efficiency marked her as the lead flight attendant. Anna Richards carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years in the air, commanding respect with her practiced smile. But that smile faltered when her eyes landed on Elijah. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice low and measured. "May I see your boarding pass?" Elijah looked up, mildly surprised but not alarmed. He handed her the slip without hesitation. Anna studied it, her brow furrowing slightly as she glanced from the ticket to him, then back again. "There seems to be a mistake," she said, her tone taking on a subtly patronizing edge. "This seat is assigned to a first-class passenger. I'll have to ask you to move to economy." For a moment, Elijah simply stared at her, trying to process the situation. Years of navigating a world that often judged him on sight had trained him to stay calm in moments like this. "This is my assigned seat," he said evenly. "The ticket confirms it." Anna's smile tightened as she returned the ticket. "I understand, sir, but I believe there's been a booking error. Our first-class section is reserved for premium passengers. Please gather your belongings and we'll find you another seat." The implied meaning in her words hung heavily in the air. Elijah glanced around, aware that a few of the nearby passengers were now paying close attention. Some looked uncomfortable, their gazes darting between him and Anna. Others, however, seemed to silently side with her, their expressions betraying subtle disapproval. "I see," Elijah replied, his voice steady but firm. "I'd like to speak with the captain before making any changes. This seems like a matter that can be clarified quickly." Anna hesitated, a flicker of annoyance crossing her polished features. "The captain is busy with pre-flight preparations," she said, her tone cooler now. "I'm the lead flight attendant, and I'm handling this matter." Yeah, Elijah could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the cabin on him. He had a choice. Press the issue now and risk escalating the situation, or comply temporarily and address it later. Swallowing his frustration, he nodded. "I'll move," he said, gathering his things. "But I still want to speak with the captain before we take off." Anna's relief was palpable as she stepped back to let him pass. Elijah could sense the silent judgment of some passengers as he walked toward the economy section. It wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. For now, he would play along. But a fire had ignited within him. This wasn't over, and he intended to ensure that. Everyone on board, including Anna, would understand the weight of what had just happened. Elijah Carter settled into the narrow economy seat, his knees brushing against the seat in front of him as he adjusted to the cramped confines. The difference between this and the spacious luxury of first class was stark, but it wasn't just the physical discomfort that bothered him. It was the principle. His boarding pass was clear, his place in first class earned and paid for, and yet here he was, wedged into a seat that wasn't meant for him. The economy cabin bustled with noise and movement, passengers jostling for overhead bin space, children squirming in their seats, and flight attendants moving swiftly to organize the chaos. Elijah watched the scene unfold with a professional eye, noting the efficiency of the crew despite the disarray. This was a world he knew well, but seeing it from this perspective only deepened the simmering frustration within him. Elijah leaned back slightly, clutching his book, though the words on the page blurred as his mind replayed the earlier interaction. Years of navigating subtle biases and outright discrimination had taught him how to pick his battles. But this wasn't just about him, it was about what his presence in first class represented. A black man succeeding in a space where many still believed he didn't belong. The thought gnawed at him as he let out a slow, measured breath. It wasn't long before he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Anna Richards was making her way down the aisle, her expression unreadable but her stride purposeful. She stopped just short of his row, adjusting her blazer as though steeling herself. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice lower now, as if hoping to avoid drawing attention. "I've reviewed the seating arrangements with my colleagues, and it appears there was an overbooking issue. Unfortunately, that's why you were reassigned to this section." Elijah raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor masking the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. Overbooking issue," he repeated, his voice even. "And yet I'm the one being reassigned, despite having a confirmed first-class ticket." Anna's polite smile faltered. It's not about you specifically, sir. We do our best to accommodate all passengers, but sometimes adjustments have to be made. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his tone unwavering. Mr. Richards, let's not dance around the truth. If this were truly an overbooking issue, I wouldn't be the only one affected. So, I'll ask again. Why was I moved? Anna hesitated, her discomfort now evident as her gaze darted toward the nearby passengers, who were beginning to take notice. A middle-aged woman seated across the aisle furrowed her brow, glancing between Elijah and Anna with growing concern. Elijah caught her eye briefly, sensing the silent question there. What's going on? Anna cleared her throat, regaining her composure. Sir, I assure you we're doing everything we can to resolve this. The captain is unavailable at the moment, but I can arrange for you to speak with customer service after we land. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. I appreciate the offer, but that won't suffice. I requested to speak with the captain before takeoff, and I'm standing by that request. By now, the murmurs had spread across the cabin. Passengers were leaning into the aisles, their eyes shifting between Elijah and Anna. The woman across the aisle finally spoke, her voice laced with concern. Is everything all right here? Anna turned to her, her professional veneer slipping slightly. Everything is under control, ma'am. Just a seating issue we're addressing. Elijah, however, saw an opportunity. Turning to the woman, he said, I was seated in first class, but I've been asked to move without a clear explanation. I'm simply asking for clarity. The woman's eyes widened, her gaze flickering to Anna with a hint of disapproval. That doesn't seem fair, she murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Anna stiffened, the weight of the passenger's scrutiny pressing down on her. Sir, she said, her tone sharper now, I must insist that we move forward with the flight. Please remain in your assigned seat and allow us to proceed. Elijah remained steadfast, his calm demeanor unshaken. I'm not disrupting the flight. I'm asking for accountability. If this situation can't be resolved properly, I'd like to escalate it to someone who can. Anna's discomfort was now palpable, her polished exterior cracking as she fidgeted with the hem of her blazer. The tension in the cabin was thick, the whispers growing louder as more passengers tuned into the unfolding drama. A few exchanged uneasy glances, while others openly watched, their faces etched with curiosity and concern. Sensing the growing unease, Anna finally stepped back, her voice tight. I'll consult with the rest of the crew. Please remain seated, Mr. Carter. As she retreated toward the front of the cabin, Elijah allowed himself a moment to breathe. He could feel the eyes of the passengers on him, some sympathetic, others wary. This wasn't the kind of attention he sought, but he knew that letting this go would only reinforce the behavior he was determined to challenge. Anna disappeared into the galley, her hurried gestures visible to anyone paying attention. Elijah caught sight of another crew member stepping forward, their quiet conversation marked by furtive glances in his direction. He leaned back in his seat, his resolve unshaken. This wasn't over, not yet. The growing momentum in the cabin signaled that the next act of this story was about to begin. As the low hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin, the tension simmered just below the surface. Elijah sat in the cramped economy seat, his composure intact but his thoughts racing. Whispers from nearby passengers floated through the air, some confused, others sympathetic, and a few tinged with judgment. In the front of the plane, Anna Richards was huddled with a fellow flight attendant. Imagine this: a bright 10-year-old girl walks into what her family believed was the safest, most inclusive school in their community. She was excited for her first day, ready to thrive under the guidance of her new teacher. But by the end of the day, her spirit was shattered. Why? Because that very teacher, the one meant to protect and uplift her, served her a grotesque, humiliating meal, accompanied by words so cruel they left her questioning her worth. Her father knew something was wrong, and when he uncovered the truth, it wasn't just about his daughter, it was about a system that allowed such hate to exist unchecked. What happens next is a story of outrage, resilience, and a family's fight for justice. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking events that turned a place of promise into a battleground for change, and reveal how one brave little girl inspired a movement that would challenge prejudice in even the most progressive environments. Her face flushed with frustration as she gestured animatedly. Unbeknownst to her, the situation was about to escalate in a way she hadn't anticipated. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Mason, a seasoned pilot with a calm demeanor, was being briefed by a visibly uncomfortable Anna. She explained the seating issue with vague details, avoiding specifics that might incriminate her. First Officer Derek Williams, seated nearby, furrowed his brow as Anna mentioned the name of the passenger in question. "Wait," Derek interrupted, his voice sharp with realization. "Did you say Elijah Carter?" Anna hesitated, her confidence faltering. "Yes, why?" Derek leaned back, a mix of disbelief and frustration flashing across his face. "Elijah Carter is Captain Carter. He's a senior pilot with our airline." The air in the cockpit grew heavy as Captain Mason's expression darkened. He turned to Anna, his voice low but firm. "Are you telling me you relocated one of our captains to economy? Based on what, exactly?" Anna stammered, her polished facade crumbling. I didn't realize it. I thought there was a misunderstanding." Mason exchanged a glance with Derek, his irritation barely concealed. "Derek, go find Captain Carter and bring him here immediately. I'll handle this." Derek nodded, exiting the cockpit with purpose. As he entered the economy cabin, his eyes scanned the rows until they landed on Elijah. Despite the casual attire, there was no mistaking the poised figure seated among the cramped rows. "Captain Carter," Derek said, his voice carrying a note of respect that turned heads nearby, "may I have a word with you?" The murmurs began almost instantly, passengers exchanging confused glances. Elijah looked up, his calm exterior masking the flicker of satisfaction at hearing his title acknowledged. "Of course," he replied, rising smoothly from his seat. The whispers grew louder as Derek led him down the aisle. "Did he say Captain?" one passenger murmured. "Is he a pilot?" another asked, their tone tinged with surprise. The realization rippled through the cabin, shifting perceptions in an instant. Elijah caught glimpses of their reactions, expressions ranging from embarrassment to awe, The same people who had looked at him with curiosity or judgment now wore a different kind of gaze, one tinged with the weight of their own assumptions. As they approached the cockpit, Derek opened the door and motioned Elijah inside. Captain Mason stood to greet him, his expression a mix of contrition and professionalism. "Captain Carter," Mason began, extending a hand, "I want to sincerely apologize for the events that led to this. This was a grave mistake, and it never should have happened." Elijah shook his hand firmly but said nothing, waiting for Mason to continue. "I've been made aware of the circumstances," Mason said, his tone heavy. "And I assure you, this behavior does not reflect the values of our airline. On behalf of the crew, I deeply regret the treatment you've experienced." Elijah's gaze shifted to Anna, who stood near the galley door, her usual composure shattered. She avoided his eyes, her hands fidgeting nervously. Elijah addressed her directly, his voice steady but pointed. "Ms. Richards, I don't believe you acted with malice, but I do believe you acted with bias. Whether conscious or unconscious, the assumptions you made were based on how I look, not who I am. That's unacceptable, not just for me, but for anyone." Anna's face flushed crimson as she stumbled over her words. "Captain Carter, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I wasn't thinking, and I realize now how wrong I was." Elijah studied her for a moment before nodding. "Acknowledging the mistake is a start. What matters is what you do going forward." Captain Mason cleared his throat. "Captain Carter, if you're willing, I'd like you to take command of this flight as the relief captain, as originally planned. It's only right that you're recognized for the professional you are." Elijah considered the offer, weighing the significance of the moment. "I'll take command," he said finally. "But first, I'd like to address the passengers." Mason nodded, stepping aside as Elijah moved to the intercom. Picking up the handset, Elijah took a steadying breath before speaking. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Elijah Carter speaking. I'll be serving as your relief captain for this flight. Before we proceed, I feel it's important to address something that happened during boarding." The cabin fell silent, every passenger hanging on his words. "Earlier, I was asked to move from first class to economy, not because of an overbooking issue, as was stated, but because assumptions were made about me based on my appearance. This is an uncomfortable truth, but one we must confront." Elijah paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the cabin. "This isn't just about me. It's about the broader issue of how we treat one another and the biases we carry. We owe it to ourselves and to each other to challenge those biases, to see beyond the surface, and to treat every person with the dignity and respect they deserve." The cabin remained silent, the impact of his message palpable. "I've chosen to continue as your captain today because I believe in leading by example. I hope that this experience will encourage all of us to reflect on how we view and value the people around us. Thank you, and I look forward to ensuring a safe and smooth journey for everyone on board." As Elijah hung up the intercom, a slow clap began in the first-class cabin. It grew, spreading to the economy, until the entire plane erupted into applause. Passengers stood, some with tears in their eyes, others visibly moved by the power of his words. Anna, standing at the back of the cabin, wiped away a tear, her expression a mixture of shame and determination. She knew this moment would stay with her, not as a mark of failure, but as a turning point. Elijah returned to the cockpit, where Captain Mason extended his gratitude once more. "You've set an example today that we can all learn from," Mason said quietly. Elijah simply nodded, settling into the captain's seat with the same calm professionalism he had carried throughout. The flight continued, but the ripples of what had occurred were just beginning to spread, touching the lives of everyone on board in ways they hadn't yet realized. As the plane settled into its cruising altitude, the cabin remained unusually quiet. The earlier commotion and Elijah's poignant address had left an indelible mark on everyone aboard. In the first-class cabin, passengers sat in a contemplative hush, their expressions ranging from discomfort to quiet remorse. A middle-aged man in a crisp business suit leaned over to them. Seatmate, a young woman scrolling through her phone, and Nid whispered, "We just sat there. We didn't say a word. It feels wrong, doesn't it?" The woman nodded, her face tinged with guilt. "I saw the way she treated him, and I don't know. I thought about saying something, but I didn't want to make a scene. Now, I wish I had." Further back in the economy cabin, the atmosphere was equally subdued, though punctuated with occasional murmurs of conversation. A mother traveling with her teenage daughter glanced across the aisle at the empty seat Elijah had left behind. "You see," she said to her daughter in a low voice, "this is why we talk about these things. It's not just about what we do, but about what we don't do when it matters." The daughter, her headphones resting around her neck, looked thoughtful. "I didn't think something like this could happen to someone like him. He's a pilot, for crying out loud." "That's the point," her mother replied. "Bias doesn't care who you are. It's about who people think you are." The conversations rippled through the cabin, passengers grappling with their own assumptions and complicity. Some exchanged quiet apologies with each other, while others sat in introspection, the weight of their silence pressing on them like the cabin pressure itself. In the crew galley, Anna Richards leaned against the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a bottle of water. Her usual poise was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability she hadn't felt in years. Her colleague, a younger flight attendant named Claire, approached her cautiously. "You okay?" Claire asked gently. Anna shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "No, not even close. I keep replaying it in my head, the way I spoke to him, the assumptions I made. I've always told myself I'm fair, that I treat everyone the same. But today, I proved myself wrong." Claire placed a reassuring hand on Anna's arm. "You made a mistake, a big one. But the important thing is what you do next. Captain Carter gave us all a chance to learn from this. Don't waste it." Anna nodded, her resolve hardening. "I won't. I can't." Meanwhile, other members of the crew quietly admired Elijah's composure and the grace with which he had handled the situation. "Did you see the way he spoke to the passengers?" one attendant said to another. "He could have lashed out and no one would have blamed him, but instead he used it as a teachable moment. That's real leadership." In the cockpit, Elijah sat calmly at the controls, his focus on the task at hand. First Officer Derek Williams broke the silence, his voice tinged with respect. "Captain Carter, I don't know if I've said this yet, but the way you handled that situation back there, it was remarkable." Elijah glanced at Derek, offering a small smile. "Thank you. It's not the first time I've had to deal with something like this, though I wish it would be the last." Derek nodded, his admiration evident. "I think you made a real impact today, on all of us." A knock on the cockpit door interrupted their conversation. Claire stepped in, holding a small stack of handwritten notes. "Captain Carter," she said, speaking officially in English. "I'd like to get some understanding of how the situation relates to the greater grand scheme of things." "Good, please." Elijah accepted the notes with a quiet nod, his fingers brushing against the edges of the paper. As he flicked through them, the sincerity of the words struck him. Apologies for silence. Pledges to confront bias. Gratitude for his courage. One note, written in neat handwriting on the back of a boarding pass, read, "You reminded me that silence is complicity. I'll do better. Thank you." "These mean a lot," Elijah said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "It's a step forward." Claire hesitated before speaking again. "Captain, Anna wanted me to tell you she's sorry. She's struggling with what happened, but she's determined to make it right." Elijah nodded. "Acknowledging the mistake is the first step. I hope she sees this as an opportunity to grow." As the flight continued, the notes were a source of quiet encouragement for Elijah. They reminded him that change, however small, was possible. It started with one moment, one conversation, and rippled outward, touching lives in ways he couldn't always see. Back in the cabin, passengers continued to reflect on the day's events. Some began drafting emails to the airline, praising Elijah's professionalism and urging for systemic changes in training and policies. Others made mental notes to have tough conversations with their families and friends about the biases they had witnessed and perhaps carried themselves. The plane hurtled toward its destination, carrying not just passengers but the weight of a shared reckoning. In the wake of discomfort, a quiet transformation was taking place, one person at a time, and at the center of it all was Elijah, steadfast in his mission not just to fly planes, but to elevate minds and hearts. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, the atmosphere on board felt lighter, though a quiet reverence still lingered. Captain Elijah Carter had returned to the cockpit, resuming his role as the relief captain with the same calm professionalism that had defined him throughout the ordeal. His steady hand on the controls and composed demeanor were a silent reminder to the passengers and crew that dignity and resilience carried far more weight than anger ever could. From the first-class cabin to the back rows of economy, passengers were still abuzz with conversation. Many shared their reflections, not just about the incident, but about the broader implications it revealed. A businessman in first class leaned toward his seatmate, a middle-aged woman in a tailored blazer. "I can't stop thinking about how easily we accept what's in front of us," he admitted. "If no one had spoken up, we would have left this flight unchanged." His seatmate nodded solemnly. Captain Cotter turned an ugly moment into something meaningful. The least we can do is carry that forward. In economy, a group of college students scribbled notes on napkins, their conversation punctuated with earnest debates. "We have to share this," one of them insisted. "People need to know what happened and what he said about challenging biases." Meanwhile, in the galley, Anna Richards stood alone, her hands gripping the counter as she steadied her breathing. The guilt that had weighed on her since the confrontation had only grown heavier. Her colleagues had been kind but firm in their feedback, encouraging her to reflect on her actions and their implications. Yet, it was Elijah's poised response that echoed in her mind, his words striking a chord she couldn't ignore. As the plane landed smoothly and taxied to the gate, a wave of applause broke out across the cabin. It wasn't for the landing alone, but for the man in the cockpit who had turned what could have been a bitter moment into a call for reflection and growth. Elijah, aware of the ripple effect his actions had caused, couldn't help but feel a quiet pride. He had done more than his duty as a captain. He had led by example. When the passengers began disembarking, Anna found herself lingering by the cockpit door, waiting for Elijah to emerge. Her usual confidence had been replaced by vulnerability, but she knew this conversation was one she couldn't avoid. When Elijah stepped out, still in his captain's uniform, she took a deep breath and approached him. "Captain Carter," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to thank you for the way you handled everything today, and I want to apologize. What I did was inexcusable, and I'm ashamed of the assumptions I made." Elijah regarded her calmly, his expression unreadable. "Acknowledging it is a start, Anna, but the real work comes after this. It's not just about what happened today. It's about what happens tomorrow and every day after that." Ada nodded, her determination growing. "I've already spoken to HR. I've volunteered to participate in diversity training, and I'm going to share my experience with the crew so that we can all learn from this. I know it's not enough, but I'm committed to doing better." Elijah's expression softened slightly. "We all have biases, Anna. The difference lies in whether we choose to confront them or ignore them. If you're serious about change, then I hope this experience becomes a catalyst for you and for others." As Anna stepped aside to let Elijah continue, and passengers gathered near the terminal exit, waiting for him, a smattering of applause grew into a standing ovation as Elijah walked toward them. Some passengers shook his hand, others simply nodded their respect, and a few offered heartfelt words of gratitude. "You've changed the way I think," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." Amid the crowd, a young boy with wide eyes and a backpack covered in airplane patches tugged at his mother's sleeve. She smiled and gently pushed him forward. "Go on, sweetheart." The boy approached Elijah, his voice shy but filled with awe. Captain Carter, I want to be a pilot someday, like you. Elijah crouched to meet the boy's gaze, his smile genuine. You can be anything you want to be. And when you're up there, flying through the clouds, remember this. It's not just about where you're going. It's about how you carry yourself on the journey. The boy grinned, his excitement palpable. I'll remember. Thank you, Captain. As the crowd began to disperse, Elijah was approached by a woman in a tailored suit. She introduced herself as the airline's CEO, her expression both apologetic and impressed. Captain Carter, I want to extend my deepest apologies for what you endured today. This incident has exposed weaknesses in our system, and we're committed to addressing them. If you're willing, I'd like to invite you to help us develop a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program for our staff. Elijah studied her, appreciating her directness. I'll help, he said finally, but only if we focus on lasting change. This can't just be a reaction to today's events. It has to be systemic. The CEO nodded. Agreed? Your leadership today set an example for all of us. We're fortunate to have you on our team. As Elijah left the terminal, he reflected on the day's events. The journey to equality was far from over, and progress was never linear. But today had been a step forward, a step toward a world where people weren't judged by appearances, but valued for their character and contributions. Looking up at the clear sky, Elijah allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. The flight was over, but his mission had just begun. And for every aspiring pilot, every passenger who left the plane with a renewed perspective, and every crew member determined to do better, the impact of this journey would resonate far beyond the runway.